For most of recorded galactic history, humanity was not feared, not respected, not even truly acknowledged. They existed on the fringes of official maps, marked as a minor, developing species with no meaningful influence beyond their immediate systems. Ancient empires rose and collapsed without ever considering them relevant. Trade routes bypassed their territory. Diplomatic councils rarely mentioned them except as statistical footnotes in expansion reports. To the dominant civilizations, humanity was predictable in the most dismissive way, fractured internally, emotionally driven, technologically uneven. Their early transmissions were studied briefly, then archived as curiosities. Attempts at formal contact had been made once, long ago, but the conclusions were unanimous. Humanity was not dangerous. Not yet, and perhaps not ever. That judgment became doctrine. Generations of alien strategists categorized species based on threat potential, adaptability, and long-term risk. Humanity consistently ranked low. Their rate of progress was deemed inconsistent. Their social structures too unstable. Their priorities too inward. They were seen as a civilization more likely to collapse under its own contradictions than rise to challenge the established order. And yet, quietly, without declaration or spectacle, humanity continued to advance. They did not compete for influence in galactic councils. They did not seek alliances with dominant powers. They did not expand aggressively into contested regions. Instead, their activity remained contained, focused, and, most notably, unobserved. Probes sent to monitor human space began returning incomplete data. Some failed entirely. Others transmitted readings that contradicted known physical laws before cutting off without explanation. At first, these anomalies were dismissed as technical errors. Equipment failures. Calibration issues. But the pattern persisted. Long-range scans of human-controlled systems occasionally revealed energy signatures that did not match any known propulsion or infrastructure. Brief, untraceable spikes of power would appear and vanish without a source. Surveillance drones dispatched to investigate would lose signal at consistent distances, as if encountering a boundary that had no measurable form. Reports accumulated. Analysts noted irregularities. A handful of researchers suggested that humanity might be developing technologies outside conventional frameworks. Those suggestions were rejected. The consensus held firm. Humanity lacked the cohesion and resources required for such breakthroughs. Still, the anomalies grew more frequent. Entire observation arrays reported brief distortions when monitoring human space. Not disruptions, distortions. Time stamps would desynchronize. Light from distant stars would appear slightly shifted, as though space itself had been altered along the line of sight. These incidents were subtle, often lasting fractions of a second, but they were consistent enough to be recorded across multiple independent systems. Even then, no action was taken. The galaxy had seen irregularities before. Isolated phenomena, unexplained events, statistical outliers. None of it was enough to challenge established assumptions. Humanity remained categorized as insignificant. Whatever they were doing, it was assumed to be limited in scope. Contained. Harmless. Then the monitoring stations near the galactic core detected something that could not be ignored. It began as a fluctuation, mass readings where no mass had previously existed. Not a gradual emergence, but an instantaneous presence. One moment, the region was empty. The next, it was occupied by objects of immense scale, appearing without transition, without approach vectors, without any detectable form of travel. The first reports were flagged as sensor malfunction. Multiple stations confirmed the same data within seconds. The objects were ships. Thousands of them. Arranged in precise formation at the outer boundary of the galactic core. Their signatures did not match any known design, any recognized civilization, or any recorded technology. They emitted no communication signals. No propulsion trails. No signs of active systems beyond a constant, low-level energy field that could not be analyzed. Identification protocols were initiated. Cross-referencing began across all major databases. The result was immediate and unanimous. The fleet belonged to humanity. There had been no prior movement detected. No fleet construction on record at that scale. No transit signatures leading to their position. They had not traveled there in any observable sense. They had simply appeared, fully formed, perfectly aligned, and completely still. No announcement followed. No declaration of intent. No response to incoming signals from nearby systems. They did not advance. They did not retreat. They remained exactly where they had manifested, positioned at the edge of the core, facing inward toward the densest region of the galaxy. Within minutes, every major civilization became aware of their presence. Long-range arrays focused on the fleet. Spectral analysis attempted to break down their composition. Gravitational mapping sought to determine their true mass and structure. Every method returned incomplete or conflicting results. The ships appeared solid, yet their readings fluctuated slightly, as if their exact position and density were not entirely fixed. Still, they did nothing. No weapons were activated. No probes were launched. No formation changes occurred. The entire fleet maintained absolute stillness, as though waiting for something that had not yet begun. Across the galaxy, attention shifted. Trade slowed. Military networks heightened alert status. Diplomatic channels flooded with inquiries, accusations, and demands for clarification. Emergency sessions were convened among species that had not shared direct communication in centuries. The presence of a human fleet of that magnitude, in that location, without explanation, disrupted every established model of power and intent. And yet, the most unsettling detail remained unchanged. Humanity offered no explanation. No message was transmitted. No acknowledgement of the growing tension. No indication that they were even aware of the observation directed toward them. They had emerged without warning. And now, at the center of everything, they simply watched. The stillness did not ease tension. It magnified it. Across the galaxy, observation networks locked onto the human formation, feeding continuous data into military, scientific, and political systems. The more the fleet was studied, the less it made sense. Ships of that scale should have emitted detectable heat, propulsion signatures, communication noise, anything that suggested active systems. Instead, the readings remained minimal, almost deliberately suppressed, as if the fleet existed just above the threshold of measurable presence. No civilization accepted that silence as neutral. The first responses were cautious. Diplomatic vessels were dispatched from nearby systems, broadcasting standardized greeting protocols across every known frequency. Messages repeated in mathematical constants, universal linguistic structures, even reconstructed fragments of early human languages. The transmissions reached the fleet. Nothing came back. The vessels closed distance carefully, maintaining non-threatening trajectories. At a predetermined range, all communication ceased. Not gradually, instantly. Signals terminated mid-transmission. Telemetry froze, then vanished. The ships themselves remained visible for a brief moment, drifting forward without control, before they too disappeared from tracking systems entirely. No debris was detected. No energy discharge. No trace. The incident was repeated by another species using autonomous probes. Smaller, faster, shielded against environmental hazards. The result was identical. At the same invisible boundary, systems failed. Data streams corrupted into incomprehensible fragments. One probe managed to transmit a final burst before loss of contact. Visual data distorted beyond recognition, shapes bending in ways that violated perspective, as if space itself had been folded incorrectly. After that, no probe returned anything at all. Scientific institutions attempted long-range analysis instead. High-spectrum scans, gravitational mapping, quantum resonance tracking, methods designed to observe without intrusion. These, too, began producing inconsistencies. Measurements taken seconds apart did not align. Distances fluctuated by fractions that should not have been possible. In some cases, the fleet appeared slightly offset from its previous position, not by movement, but by contradiction, two sets of data claiming different realities at the same time. Timestamps began drifting. Observation logs from separate systems no longer synchronized. Events recorded as simultaneous appeared seconds apart when cross-referenced. In extreme cases, entire segments of recorded data seemed to repeat or skip forward without continuity. Analysts initially attributed the issue to network interference. That explanation failed when isolated, closed systems began reporting the same irregularities. The closer the focus on the human fleet, the less stable the surrounding measurements became. Fear replaced uncertainty. Militaristic civilizations interpreted the silence as strategic dominance. A display of control so complete that no communication was necessary. Defensive fleets were mobilized across multiple sectors. Weapon systems were primed, not aimed at the humans directly, but held in readiness for escalation that had no defined trigger. Diplomatic alliances fractured under pressure. Accusations spread. Some claimed certain species had prior knowledge of humanity's capabilities. Others suggested hidden agreements, secret collaborations that explained the sudden appearance of such advanced technology. No evidence supported these claims, but the absence of answers fueled suspicion. Ancient species, those that had witnessed cycles of rise and collapse for millennia, responded differently. They did not mobilize. They withdrew. Their long-range sensors, refined through ages of observation, detected something beneath the surface of the event, something not centered on the fleet itself, but on where it had chosen to appear. The galactic core. Attention shifted there, reluctantly at first. The region was not unexplored, but it was avoided. Gravitational instability, radiation density, and spatial distortion made it impractical for sustained observation. Most civilizations treated it as a boundary, not a destination. Humanity had positioned its entire fleet at the edge of that boundary, oriented inward, as if the rest of the galaxy was no longer their concern. That detail did not go unnoticed. A coalition was formed, rapidly and without precedent. Species that had competed for dominance now shared data in real time, pooling resources to achieve what none could accomplish alone. Their objective was simple: force an answer. Not through aggression but through presence. A unified approach, too large to ignore. The coalition fleet assembled in stages, thousands of ships converging from multiple systems, forming a line opposite the human formation at a safe observational distance. They broadcast a single, synchronized transmission, a demand for explanation, framed in the most neutral terms possible. It was received. Again, there was no reply. The coalition advanced incrementally, testing the invisible boundary that had consumed previous attempts. Every movement was calculated, every system monitored for the slightest anomaly. The distance closed. Tension escalated. Weapons remained offline, but targeting systems tracked potential vectors instinctively, preparing for a reaction that might never come. At the threshold where earlier probes had failed, the coalition halted. Sensors fluctuated. Not violently, not catastrophically, but enough to register a change. Data streams flickered. Minor desynchronizations appeared in timestamps. Nothing was lost, but nothing felt stable. It was as if the region itself resisted precise measurement. Then one of the forward drones transmitted. The signal was weak, fragmented, but intact long enough to be recorded across the entire coalition network. Visual input showed nothing unusual at first: darkness, distant stars, the outline of the human fleet ahead. Then the image shifted. Not by movement, but by distortion. Lines bent. Depth collapsed inward. The stars behind the fleet seemed to stretch, not outward, but toward a point that did not exist in normal space. Audio followed, distorted beyond recognition, layered with interference that pulsed in irregular intervals. Beneath it, a pattern emerged, unintended, incomplete, but unmistakably structured. The final transmission cut through the noise for less than a second. "It's not them, it's behind them." The signal ended. The drone vanished. No debris. No energy spike. No measurable cause. For the first time since the human fleet had appeared, the silence carried a different weight. Attention shifted again, not to the ships, but to what lay beyond them. And for the first time, the galaxy began to consider the possibility that humanity was not the source of the threat. They were standing in front of it. The transmission did not spread slowly. It propagated instantly across every network that had access to coalition data. It was replayed, analyzed, reconstructed, and dissected from every possible angle. The phrase was short, incomplete, and lacking context, yet it altered the direction of inquiry more effectively than any direct answer could have. Focus shifted beyond the human formation. Long-range instruments recalibrated toward the galactic core, pushing against limitations that had discouraged deep observation for generations. The region had always been difficult to study. Gravitational interference, radiation density, and overlapping stellar formations obscured precise measurement. Now, with coordinated effort across multiple civilizations, those limitations were challenged. The first clear readings did not make sense. Energy distributions within the core fluctuated without pattern. Not chaotic, structured, but following no model recognized by existing science. Mass concentrations appeared where no stellar bodies were present, then dissipated without trace. Gravitational mapping returned inconsistencies that suggested depth where there should have been none, as if layers of space overlapped in ways that conventional geometry could not describe. At first, analysts assumed instrumentation error. Then identical readings came from independent systems, built on entirely different principles. A pattern began to emerge, not in the data itself, but in its persistence. The anomalies were not random. They repeated at intervals that could not be measured in standard units of time. Events appeared to echo, not sequentially, but concurrently. What should have been cause and effect blurred into simultaneous occurrence. Something within the core was active. The realization forced a reevaluation of earlier records. Archived reports, long dismissed as irrelevant, were retrieved and cross-referenced. Among them were fragments of human-origin data, intercepted transmissions, partially decoded logs, and anomalous readings recorded decades earlier. At the time, they had been ignored, categorized as experimental noise or misinterpretation. Now they aligned. Human deep space exploration had reached the outer boundaries of the core long before any other species attempted sustained study. Their findings had never been formally shared, but traces of their work had leaked into broader networks in incomplete forms. When reconstructed, those fragments described a presence, not a structure, not a life form in any known sense, but an entity defined by interaction rather than composition. It did not occupy space in a fixed manner. It influenced it. Early human records referred to it indirectly, avoiding definitive classification. Descriptions focused on effects rather than form. Regions where physical constants shifted slightly. Areas where signals degraded in ways that suggested interference without a source. Zones where objects entering experienced displacement, not movement through space, but alteration of position without traversal. The deeper those early probes went, the less reliable their data became. Eventually, they stopped returning. What followed was not a retreat, but a change in approach. Human activity around the core increased, but in ways that avoided direct penetration. Observational arrays were established at varying distances. Energy patterns were mapped over extended periods. Instead of attempting to reach the center, they studied its boundaries, tracking fluctuations, measuring distortions, identifying thresholds where stable space began to degrade. Over time, a conclusion formed. The entity was not dormant. It was contained. Not by design, not by intention, but by the natural constraints of its environment. The density and instability of the core acted as a barrier, limiting its influence beyond a certain range. However, that range was not fixed. It shifted. Expanded incrementally, then contracted, then expanded again, each cycle extending slightly further than the last. Human projections indicated a trend. Eventually, the containment would fail. The fragments of these findings, once dismissed, now carried weight. Cross-species analysis confirmed the possibility. The anomalies currently observed matched the early human data, but with greater intensity. The fluctuations were stronger. The inconsistencies more pronounced. The boundary between stable and unstable regions was moving outward. Slowly, but consistently. The human fleet's position was no longer arbitrary. It aligned precisely with the outermost projected expansion of the entity's influence. They had not chosen that location for visibility or strategy. They had chosen it as a line. Further analysis of the fleet itself revealed subtle changes. The low-level energy field surrounding each ship was not static. It pulsed in coordinated intervals, synchronized across the entire formation. Individually, the emissions were negligible. Collectively, they formed a pattern, interlocking frequencies that extended beyond the fleet's physical perimeter. The field did not project outward. It pressed inward, toward the core. For the first time, a functional interpretation of the human presence emerged. The fleet was not observing. It was interacting. Not aggressively, not destructively, but in opposition to something that could not be directly engaged through conventional means. A barrier, not against intrusion from the galaxy, but against emergence from within the core. As this understanding spread, the emotional response across civilizations shifted. Fear remained, but its direction changed. Humanity was no longer the unknown variable. The unknown lay beyond them. New scans detected movement within the distortion field of the core. Not motion in the traditional sense, but a redistribution of anomalies, concentrations of irregularity converging toward the boundary. The pattern resembled approach, but without defined form. The coalition fleet, still positioned opposite the humans, recorded the changes in real time. Instruments designed for warfare proved useless. Targeting systems could not lock onto anything that lacked consistent coordinates. Defensive protocols offered no parameters for engagement. For the first time, the combined military strength of multiple civilizations had nothing to act upon. Humanity, however, did not reposition. They did not reinforce their formation. They did not deploy additional units. They maintained their alignment with absolute precision, as if every ship occupied a fixed point in a structure larger than itself. The implications settled slowly, but completely. This was not an arrival. It was a response. Humanity had not come to introduce themselves to the galaxy. They had come because something was reaching out of the core. And they were the only ones prepared to stop it. The change began without a visible trigger. Instruments across the coalition fleet registered simultaneous deviations, gravitational readings slipping beyond tolerance, electromagnetic spectra widening into frequencies that had no classification, time indices drifting just enough to break synchronization across systems that had never failed before. None of it was catastrophic in isolation. Together, it formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. The boundary was moving. What had been a distant irregularity within the core extended outward, pressing against the invisible line where stable space ended and distortion began. It did not surge. It advanced with controlled inevitability, like pressure building behind a barrier designed to hold it back. The human fleet did not retreat. Their formation tightened, not through motion, but through alignment. Minor positional adjustments brought each vessel into sharper synchronization with the others. The low-level energy field surrounding them intensified, no longer subtle enough to be dismissed as background activity. The pulses became defined, rhythmic, and unified across thousands of ships. For the first time since their arrival, the fleet was visibly active. The coalition's sensors attempted to interpret the change. Energy output increased, but not in a way that suggested weapon activation. There were no targeting signatures, no directional emissions toward external objects. Everything the humans generated was focused inward, toward the expanding distortion at the edge of the core. Then the distortion reached the line. Space did not tear. It did not explode. It lost coherence. Stars beyond the boundary blurred, their positions stretching into elongated shapes that did not align with any perspective. Light behaved inconsistently, some wavelengths bending inward, others dispersing as though encountering a medium that was not there. Depth collapsed in localized regions, creating areas where distance could not be measured in any meaningful way. The coalition fleet held position, but their systems struggled to maintain function. Navigation algorithms returned conflicting coordinates. Internal clocks desynchronized. Communications lagged unpredictably, some messages arriving before they were sent according to recorded time stamps. The phenomenon was not attacking them. It was redefining the environment they existed in. Within that distortion, something moved, not as an object, but as a shift in the pattern itself. A concentration of irregularity, denser than its surroundings, pressing forward against the human formation. It had no outline, no surface, no definable structure. Yet its presence was undeniable. Every sensor that could still function registered it differently, but all agreed on one point. It was approaching. The human fleet responded. The synchronized pulses of energy intensified into a continuous field. Individual ships ceased to register as separate sources. Their outputs merged into a single, coherent emission that extended across the entire formation. The effect on surrounding space was immediate. Distortion slowed. Light stabilized at the boundary. The expansion of the anomaly halted, not reversed, but resisted. For a moment, equilibrium formed. Then the pressure increased. Sections of the human line dimmed as localized overloads occurred. Ships did not explode or break formation, they simply lost output, their contribution to the field collapsing. Gaps appeared, small at first, but enough for the distortion to push through in thin, probing extensions. The response was instantaneous. Adjacent vessels compensated, increasing their output to reinforce the weakened sections. The field reformed, sealing the gaps before the anomaly could fully breach. The pattern repeated: failure, compensation, stabilization, over and over, each cycle demanding more from the fleet. This was not a battle in any form the galaxy understood. There were no weapons exchanged, no trajectories to track, no impacts to measure. It was a contest of influence over the fundamental behavior of space itself. The human fleet imposed structure. The entity within the core attempted to dissolve it. Time lost meaning at the boundary. Observers recorded sequences that could not be ordered reliably. Events overlapped. Cause and effect blurred. Yet one constant remained: the human formation held. Gradually, the outward pressure slowed. The concentrated irregularity receded, not withdrawn, but contained. The distortion field contracted, pulling back toward the core, its influence diminishing with each cycle of resistance imposed by the human barrier. The anomalies did not vanish. They settled, stabilizing at a distance just beyond the fleet's position. The boundary re-established itself. Across the coalition fleet, systems began to recover. Clocks resynchronized. Sensor readings returned to consistent baselines. Communication stabilized, though the silence that followed carried a weight no transmission could break. The human fleet remained in place. Several of their vessels no longer emitted energy. They held position regardless, integrated into the formation even without active output. No replacements arrived. No reinforcements emerged. The line persisted exactly as it had been defined, unchanged in structure despite the loss. There was no declaration of success. No confirmation of what had occurred. Only the absence of further expansion from the core. Analysis continued in the aftermath, but conclusions were no longer speculative. The evidence was direct, observed, and undeniable. The human fleet had not come to display power. They had come to apply it where no other force could function. Not to conquer. To hold. Across the galaxy, perception shifted in silence. Civilizations that had measured strength in fleets, territory, and weaponry now faced a reality that rendered those metrics incomplete. Power was not defined by the ability to destroy, but by the ability to prevent what could not be destroyed from reaching everything else. Humanity had understood that before anyone else. They had prepared without recognition, advanced without announcement, and acted without seeking permission or validation. When the boundary failed, they were already there. And when the pressure came, they did not move. They endured it. The core remained unstable. The entity within it was not gone. It was contained, for now, behind a line maintained by a species once dismissed as insignificant. The galaxy continued to watch, but the nature of that attention had changed. Not suspicion. Not fear. Recognition. Humanity had never been absent from the larger story. They had been standing at its edge, holding back the part no one else was ready to face. And when it finally reached outward, they were the only ones already in position.